My name's Evelyn Regan. Welcome to the University of Rochester um, Race, Gender, and Sexuality and Inequality through a Humanistic Lens. Pardon my butchering of the title. Here with me today, we've got some wonderful people from um, both the Susan B. Anthony Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies and the Frederick Douglass Institute for African and African American Studies. Thank you for joining us today and for joining us later on if you're watching the recording of it. Um, and I'll start off by letting my panelists introduce themselves. We can start off with Jane, Kristen, and Ghislaine.
Hi, I'm Jane Bryant. I'm the program manager at the Susan B. Anthony Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies. I'm also involved with the LGBTQ Advocacy Committee and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at the University of Rochester. And I'm the person who's, when we're in the office when you stop by. I hope to meet you if you come to the U of R.
Hi, I'm Kristen Dowdy. I'm a professor of anthropology. I'm currently the director of the Susan B. Anthony Institute. And I'm also the interim director of the Frederick Douglass Institute this year. So I'm here to sort of speak to both programs. We have a new director of FDI coming next year that I can talk a little bit more about later. I'm also involved in the Rochester Education Justice Initiative, which is our Rochester supported prison education program. So I go and teach college classes in area prisons as well, and the Rochester Decarceration Research Initiative.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ghislaine Radegondaisen. I'm with the Frederick Douglass Institute for African and African American Studies. I also part of the Modern Languages and Culture department where I teach French, but my main responsibility reside with the Frederick Douglass Institute, where I do many things. I'm very close to the student. I manage the program, and I work very closely with Professor Dowdy. And I work closely with the student from the Douglass Leadership House and the different student groups. And I'm also the link with the Office of Minority Student Affairs and the Study Abroad Affairs and all the different entities on campus.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to start off with some questions that are a bit more targeted towards our program managers because Ghislaine has to leave a little bit early today. But what exactly are the spaces like for both the Susan B. Anthony Institute and the Frederick Douglass Institute?
So the Frederick Douglass Institute is a multidisciplinary program. That means that we draw from most of departments, for all the departments on campus, the humanities and the social sciences, to build our curriculum. So that also means that most of our courses are cross-listed with this department, which sometimes create an overlap with the course that you would take for if you double major. In terms of the programming, we do a lot of, we offer a lot of conference, events, activities that engage students intellectually. We always try to tap into their own particular interests and contemporary issues to be able to discuss it, to reflect and to learn from each other. Within the Frederick Douglass Institute, we have at a point in time 3 to 5 student staff assistants. Most of our staff assistants just happen to be African American Studies major, so they are advocate for and representing the Institute in many of the activities that we do. We work collaboratively very closely with them, and they often provide suggestions in what they would like to see happen within the curriculum and within the activities that we have to offer, not only through our lectures, but through our video series. And we partner very closely with groups of interest of African American studies, like the Black Student Union, SOCA, and often our faculty are engaged with the students to really support what they do. Um, we work very closely with other, like I mentioned earlier, department on campus to make sure that all the assets that the university has to offer to students are available to them, and they know how to access it. In terms of what I do in the Institute, I am the link to all things. And I am the person that you would see when you come to the office. The office is located in Moray Hall on the third floor, and the third floor of Moray is when you enter the quad, and it would be on your left at the hallway, in the hallway, and we have also a conference room with a very nice library of book donated by one of the history faculty, former history faculty, and these books can be borrowed. We have an in-house system. We also make available our conference room to for small classes. Um, and we try to really accommodate students, faculties, researchers, graduate students who have interest in what we are doing to really share our spaces. All right. Do you have any additional questions that might answer?
Yep. So, kind of beyond what you've already referenced, what resources are available to students through the Frederick Douglass Institute?
In terms of resources, is a lot of resources in kind. We provide a lot of support to help them develop the activities that they want to see, to accommodate them in terms of the breadth of courses that they can access to, and to make sure that they have all the tools that they need as a student, not only on students who are interested in African American studies, but every student who come to the Frederick Douglass Institute with interest, questions, suggestions. We try to really reach out to faculty and make sure that they are able to support them.
And I can add to that later on. I know, Jisan, after you have to leave, I can talk a little bit about some of the research opportunities that students can have and what kinds of classes they can take and that sort of thing too.
Okay.
I think can fill it. But yeah,
Okay.
that's all really, really excellent.
All right.
Is there anything that you think is integral for prospective students to know about the Frederick Douglass Institute?
So in the Frederick Douglass Institute, we have an open door policy. So now it is COVID. It's we use the distance and the protocol and all of these things. I'm on campus once a week, not all the time, but outside COVID, I'm living on campus basically. So you can drop by anytime with any questions you might have regarding the program or related information that you might want to have that are not necessarily in a book. But we are here to answer your questions, and if we don't have the answer, to really direct you where you will find these answers. But we are open all the time. We have student assistants who are also there to share their experience and to be very supportive of your own experience on campus. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Jane, would you mind talking a bit about the resources that SDAI has available to students?
Sure. First, our just leading with our physical space. We're neighbor buildings with FDI. So if you're on the quad, you go to the next building a little bit farther from the library. It's Lattimore Hall. And we have a really lovely space with coffee and tea and water. And it's always open to students to come and work there. And we also have a classroom/conference space, which I know Evelyn is familiar with. And it's also open to students when it's not being used for a class or a meeting to come do work or have meetings with groups. And it's a nice spot. Come and visit us. Even if you don't end up doing GSW, like we're open to letting students, I don't know, just being a collective space on campus. And then for other sorts of resources that we offer to students, I'll talk about more of our programming stuff rather than our research kind of stuff, which I think Kristen will get to a little bit later. So every year we do a lot of programming. SBAI is typically like booked through and through, like just one after another, which is great. This year, a little bit different, but we have been doing some online stuff. Typically we have public lectures that are on topics like our Two Icons lecture, which is intersections of race and gender, or our LGBTQ topic from an academic lens lecture in the spring, and then any variety of lectures based on people who are visiting for classes or now started doing with undergraduate students, which is an opportunity to sort of workshop writing for applications outside of academia or just within wanting to take research further, which has been very beneficial. And we have coffee hours, which are just open casual spaces for people to stop by, chat with each other students, with staff, with faculty, get perspectives, bounce ideas around. We have an SBI reading group, which is open to faculty, staff, and students around gender and sexuality studies topics. So if you're not in a class, or if you want to expand your work outside of a class, but in a less official way, we have that sort of space. What are some other things that we do that are not research? I think those are sort of like basic. I mean, I do pre-major advising too, and I'm there all of the time, so I can connect people to any resource that they need, or to people who will know how to get access to those resources. As Ghislaine was saying, it's like we're connections to the rest of the university. So come to us if you have questions, but that's a basic overview of the sort of stuff that we do.
Thanks, Jane. It appears my internet's a little bit funky at the moment, so everyone froze for a minute, but we'll keep going. Hopefully all goes well. But I guess we can start off with some more broader questions as to what classes are like for undergraduate students in both FDI and SBAI.
Good, I can take that, and you should both feel free to jump in and tell me if I'm mischaracterizing or if I'm forgetting things. And I'll talk about both because I'm wearing both hats. I would say the classes in gender, sexuality, and women's studies, and also in African and African American studies, and often they're cross-listed, i.e. a class can be conserved for both. The classes tend to be relatively small. They could range from 5 to 8 students up to probably 25 is probably among our biggest. I mean, there might be the occasional class. Well, that's actually not true. You're going to have the occasional like psychology of gender class that's going to have 300 people. There certainly are bigger classes, but certainly the ones that are like in our conference room and the ones that probably will serve as, many of the electives and the core courses that you would take would be relatively smaller, discussion focused, readings, films, and then a lot of engagement. We put a lot of emphasis on talking to each other, talking to us, sharing your ideas, etc. The reason I interrupted myself there to correct myself is that, of course, because these programs are interdisciplinary, as Ghislaine said, right? What that means is that you're going to have classes that are taught by people who live or are housed in a lot of different departments. So you might have an anthropology class that looks at gender or looks at race, depending on the program, or both. You might also have a class that's taught by somebody who's trained as a historian. You might also take a class that's taught by an economist or a political scientist, and also by a studio artist, right? So you can have these are both majors that are are I don't want to say fully unique, because there are other programs like this at the institution, but I think they particularly stand out as being deeply interdisciplinary. So you'll have a few core courses that are ones that sort of we and these two programs kind of control, in the sense that they give you an overview of a certain set of themes at sort of the 100 level, the 200 level, and then like a sort of the more advanced level. But then a lot of your electives are going to be ones that are going to range quite widely in terms of the approach, and that's intentional for these. These are fields of study that have emerged through this kind of interdisciplinary approach to understanding either gender, sexuality, women's studies, or African and African American studies, and they're also both marked as institutes, as interdisciplinary disciplines, as being fields of study that emerged sort of in response to trying to trying to fix the academy, right? Like recognizing that that academic knowledge was being produced in such a way so as to exclude a tremendous number of perspectives and voices. And both of these institutes are ones that are designed to try to, around fields of study that are designed to try to address that, and in so doing to change the university itself. So classes will be interdisciplinary, and the majority of them will be relatively small seminar style classes. The other thing I'll add is that a lot of them have significant community engagement components. And that's also not by accident. That's in part because of who teaches our classes, but also because these are fields that from the beginning have prioritized learning, breaking down boundaries in the academy, and learning from people not traditionally in academia, learning from other kinds of situated expertise. So there are classes that in SBAI, for example, in gender, sexuality, and women's studies, my colleague Tanya Bakhmetieva, who was not able to be here today, who just won a teaching award, a university-wide teaching award, because she's like an extraordinary teacher and does like really brilliant stuff, teaches a lot of our core courses. She takes students in a nature class, like on hikes through the woods, in thinking about gender and gendered approaches to understanding nature, and sort of the gendered lenses built into how we conceptualize the environment. She teaches a course on food. I'm forgetting the exact title, race and gender and food, where in non-COVID times, she's literally like in a kitchen with various other people in the Rochester area who cook, and thinking about sort of food and culture and race and gender in relation to these themes. I teach a class that looks at how the towns around us are shaped by the presence of so many prisons in the Rochester area. So I take students into these towns, not into the prisons, but into the towns, to do research and talk to people who live and work in these spaces, to learn from them. So I think that whether you want to call that a community engagement or sort of a experiential learning, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. But I think that the common piece is that students are deeply, it's definitely an active learning model, and it's one that gets students off campus often, or brings off campus things into our classrooms.
Someone who had the privilege of taking many of Tanya's courses as an undergraduate student, like these courses are phenomenal. I took a history of masculinity with her, the case of Sherlock Holmes, and looking into the intersections of race, class, gender, and sexuality, and feminism in the environment as well. And all of the courses that are taught through SBAI are truly phenomenal. Even the lecture courses that you think might be maybe less engaging. Professor Estrada somehow makes this 300-person lecture of psychology of gender into a conversation-based class, which is pretty impressive. But thank you, Kristen, for your input on what gender studies, and you talked a little bit about FDI courses as well, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that too, which I think that both these, again, I always forget like which hat I'm wearing, but so I want to be sure I don't give short shrift to either. I think the other piece about both programs is that these programs address, I don't want to say we address current events, but like we think a lot about the contemporary moment. Partly like as an anthropologist, I think about the present. That's like what my research is based on. So I'm always thinking about sort of today. But the point is, like, we study things. These are also disciplines or interdisciplinary programs that are engaged with like understanding the world and inequality in the world today. So that can be certainly through, I mean, I know that we're thinking sort of humanistically here. That can be done through a range of courses that are linked that are linked to the stuff that's happening. So like right now we're in COVID times, in a period of election turmoil, in a period of unprecedented social protest. These are kinds of issues that students are talking about in our classes, right? Like we're explicitly addressing the historical antecedents of these events. What got us here? How can we understand? How can we analyze the texts that are coming out in the media and the images being used to represent what's going on, and understand the race and gendered assumptions built into the way stories are being told, et cetera, right? So I think there's across all the courses, in different ways, depending on the faculty, we really are helping students think about like the world today. And it feels, I think faculty tend to feel very connected to thinking about sort of the stakes of why they study what they study.
Definitely. So I know a lot of University of Rochester students and University of Rochester applicants tend to have interests in multiple areas of study. How do these courses within African and African American studies and gender, sexuality, and women's studies connect to maybe fields in STEM or other areas of study outside of the humanities and inside the humanities?
Jane, I'm going to turn it to you and I was going to just add, I'll turn it to you in a second, but I think that we have lots of double majors, and then Jane can maybe give some of the specifics of that too. But I'm also thinking, like, we're teaching a class this semester, or we have a colleague teaching a class. I think it's called Robot Love. Is that what our class is called, right? Yes. She's someone who's teaching explicitly a class that's about like gender and coding, and by that,
generally.
Sorry, go ahead.
And tech generally. I think it's like coding, gender, and tech, or some that like it's like, sort of like catchy title, but also good class.
And to think about sort of the ways that gender and sexuality play out in artificial worlds, and that sort of thing. It's not just about like women as coders. It's really about sort of the gendered lens to interpreting the tech world. And so part of it is, I would say, in part, we certainly offer courses that are aimed through this interdisciplinary bent to bridge that. And we're offering a class called Animating Race in the spring semester. That's about again animation and the race and gender logics built into animation. But Jane, I'm sure you have more to say. I jumped in over enthusiastically.
Oh yeah, that was great. I just wanted to list the many double majors. So at the U of R, it's very common for students to double major and sometimes even triple major, although there is nothing wrong with just a single major. I think that's great. But for the students that did double major, I'm going to list off all of the other sorts of double majors that have existed within AAS and GSW to give you a sense of just like how the GSW and AAS like fields kind of reach across into these other areas in terms of interest and informing them. Some of the most common ones in AAS are history, political science, linguistics, anthropology, health, behavior, and society, which is kind of like within the public health sciences program. And then clusters in math and sciences and earth and environmental science. And then for GSW, health, behavior, and society is our biggest one. And then after that, we have psychology and brain and cognitive sciences, biomedical engineering, computer science, and anthropology are all the biggest ones. So our students have interests in these STEM fields, and every single time I talk to anyone about like, how does GSW inform any of your other classes? They're always like, oh yeah, this is in everything. Everything that I see is related to GSW. It like, yeah, that is a short answer to a complex question. It is in every field of study, as Kristen was saying earlier about the role of gender, sexuality, and women's studies and African American studies within this like academic context is to sort of reevaluate all of these existing fields and see how all of this is embedded in and can be opened up, thought about differently. Yeah, as you know. But yeah, STEM. We have a lot of computer science, or it's surprisingly common how many computer science students we get coming through. or at least maybe not surprising, shouldn't be surprising anymore. Yeah. Does that kind of answer the question? Was that about how it relates to STEM fields? We can talk about more like getting more representation in STEM too. That is something that we're considering doing actually some programming on with a professor in physics and astronomy, trying to set up some kind of series specifically for high school teachers and other like professors about how to change their curricula to be more geared toward inclusivity and being less focused on this one sort of like this is how it's been and how it will always be. We're focused on this one sort of small thread in dominant culture. So that's some of the work that we do and that our students are obviously quite interested in.
And I'll add in too to say that I think, I mean, on one hand, these programs, we would love to have any of you who are considering coming choose to major with us or minor with us. Also, you could do clusters with us, which is the smaller. Surely, if you're interested in U of R, you've been looking into the U of R curriculum and are becoming familiar with this language of clusters. But the point is, there's also people who just sort of who take a course or two, and I mean, I personally think everybody should take a class. It should leave college having really thought critically about race and gender and intersectionality and sexuality and these other issues in terms of seeing the world differently. I'm probably a little bit biased in this regard, but I do think that there is a moment happening now, or it's certainly been happening, but I think over the last year or 6 months in particular, where, I mean, the summer of protests and the moment of COVID, it makes real clear to us how race and gender and sexuality operate in the world today and shape practically in very concrete material ways, shape people's lives, right? And by that, I mean, very basically, if we think about the health disparities in relation to COVID, who is dying of COVID, right? There's a way in which you can't understand that without thinking about race and gender. Similarly, thinking about, if you want to understand whether or not you agree with people protesting out in the streets, if you want to understand why they're there, you got to think about these issues in relation to race, gender, sexuality, et cetera. So it seems to me that there's been a lot of people sort of realizing that, or there's been, I think, a rising sense from people of gosh, I want to know more, from our colleagues, I mean to say. So since the summer began, we've been getting emails from colleagues across the university saying, how can I help my students understand this, from physics professors and from people in math, et cetera, to say, help us figure out how to support our students, help us figure out what we can be doing. And so I think campuses across the country are having these conversations. One thing that we did that is worth highlighting, and I think you can still access this on our website, in early September, there was a nationwide call for what was called Scholar Strike. It was a call put out by a scholar of religion at the University of Pennsylvania who actually used to work at U of R, Anthea Butler, but she and a colleague sort of said, it was in the wake of the NBA strike in support of Black Lives Matter. And so she said, what if academics were to do this too? And so we, through both FDI and SBAI, decided that we would honor this scholar strike as a way of amplifying our footprint, our intellectual footprint on the campus, and creating space for people to engage critically with these issues. And so a wide range of faculty opened up their classes, things that they were already teaching that day. So a psychology professor opened his class that happened to be about stereotypes and discrimination that day. A colleague opened his class that was a radical social theory class. A colleague who's teaching a class on civil disobedience opened his class. So there was a lot of I think it's a great way for people who are looking at it to see the kinds of things that we do and who's here more broadly than just us on the call. What are the kinds of classes that are going on? A lot of the events, a lot of the courses were recorded. People invited guest artists to give talks. A music faculty member put together a playlist, or compiled jointly during a session a playlist of Black protest music. My point here is to say that I think both there's an opportunity on this campus, and I think nationwide, for people who are in STEM and in other programs to add some humanistic analysis to this around these issues. And there's a lot of ongoing conversations, I think, on the campus. I do think the campus is shifting. And also, if you're interested in learning about the kinds of stuff that we're up to, that becomes is sort of a place you can click through and meet some of the other faculty that way and see some of the other kinds of conversations that were happening, and student engagement. There were a lot of student events created in relation to that. So
thank you both. Thinking about the future and what students can do with degrees in gender studies and African and African American studies, what are the postgrad outcomes for our students?
So
you want to get us started, Jane? Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start us off. You can finish. A lot of our students end up pursuing advanced degrees. Not all of them, which is, well, I'd say maybe it's half and half, kind of. Some, when they do pursue advanced degrees, they're often in law, counseling, education, healthcare, psych sort of stuff. I think Evelyn is looking toward a future in some of this, perhaps. And a lot of our other students who have like had experiential learning courses and internships end up going into the nonprofit sector and doing sort of more social service, grassroots activism type work. And that's kind of like the most common fields, although we've had students go in a lot of directions.
Yeah, I would just add to that. Again, I don't have the statistics at my fingertips, which I probably should, but I think more broadly, if I think with all of my hats, my anthropologist hat, my SBI hat, and my FDI hat, like our students at U of R, like if you commit, whatever program of study you commit to, and you go all in on it, like you're going to get an extraordinary education, and you're going to then use that to do the things you want to do. And there's actually, I mean, there's research that shows that like what the major is doesn't actually correlate with the job you get, or doesn't actually correlate with like success and well-being in the future, in the sense that it's not like, well, English majors can't get jobs, and so therefore they're like, nobody should be an English major, and like econ majors, that sounds like money, and therefore they all have better lives. Like that actually has not been borne out by the evidence. And I imagine that people in admissions and in the Career Center could cite that with more clarity. But it's not just that I'm like a mushy humanist and that's why I think this. There's like big data that where this like is borne out. But so I would say, like, if these are classes that you take and you get like really excited about them, like they're rigorous majors. Like we will put you through your paces. You will like read a lot of stuff. You will learn to analyze texts. You will learn to build logical arguments. You will be forced to write and write and write and write and write papers. You will also have opportunities to, you'll do public speaking things in class. You'll learn to think on your feet. You'll learn to debate and discuss and defend your arguments. You'll learn to be challenged by a wide range of positions. So you don't, from people from divergent perspectives in your classes. You'll conduct your own research. You likely, because of the interdisciplinary nature of both of these programs, will be able to do projects in, like, if you're really into like visual media and you want to do an honors thesis or an independent study that is more like rooted in studio art, fantastic. We will, like, there's opportunities to do that in either of these two programs. If you really like are a number cruncher at heart and you want to do something that's more like, survey and crunch data as a project, like, great. And there's a range of different, and those opportunities will serve you well towards a wide range of careers, whether it's, and we see that it could be students doing, some go on to things like law school, some paralegal, some, we have a student who is working in a hedge fund right now. We have students who are teachers. I have a student working on a farm because she's decided she wants to do like is part of the slow food movement. I mean, there's people go on to the Peace Corps, people go on to do Fulbrights, people go on to a wide range of things. I wanted to say something more about research. Is that okay for me to do that? Am I preempting your question? I just want to be sure I talk a little bit about.
You actually just predicted what question I was going to ask next.
Well, sorry if I interrupted you, but I mean, I think that the research options it gets really important, partly because, students at U of R really come in like really wanting to do research. And I think that's really important. And I'm sure that you'll see other stuff about the kinds of research supports that students can get from from the university more broadly through like the Meliora program, Meliora Scholars, is that what it's called, or through other, and there's certainly humanistic money, like money directed to help support people who are interested in the humanities. And again, as an anthropologist, I'm sort of, we're characterized as a social science, but it's a humanistic social science. So I sort of straddle both worlds. But I can give you like some concrete examples. First of all, in any given class you take, you might be doing a research project, and our students, and those can be, that could vary. That could be archival research. It could be going out and talking to people research, which is the kind of stuff that I do. You know, it could be research can mean a lot of different things depending on what the class is. So some of your research will be literally in people's classes based on assignments. Because the classes are small, you have a lot of leeway typically. If you have something you're passionate about, it's pretty easy to convince us as faculty that you want to follow that thread. So that's one opportunity is to do it in classes. You can do independent studies as you get more advanced, where if you have something you like have dug into and you talk to us about it, faculty will support you and guide you through doing that. You can do research through like I said, independent studies or an honors thesis in either program. So there's sort of ways to scaffold your learning throughout your career, your trajectory, so that you might come in as a first-year student and not feel like you have the capacity to do a full year project that results in a 50-page document. But by your senior year, you might be there. And you also might not want to do that, and that's okay. Not everybody does an honors thesis. There are also courses that are specifically designed for research projects. So as I mentioned, this class, it's called The Cultural Politics of Prison Towns, that I teach, that's co-located in GSW and in AAS and in Anthro. We take students this is a collaborative ethnographic project from day one, where students are empirically gathering the data that then becomes part of what we analyze. And they produce final projects in groups and individually around the research that they've done. So it's definitely a hands-on class. Tanya also takes students in a range of different kinds of projects. She's taken students to India for research projects. She's taken students in various other contexts to do both projects that are their own research and also things that link to broader collaborative research projects that she's been involved in. So there really are a wide range of projects. The other one I'll add through FDI, and this project is launching. So hopefully if you come, there will be opportunities for this moving forward, but a few of us there in collaboration with RIT and with some of the city libraries we're basically trying to, over the coming years, build a digital humanities, like a digital map that helps us visualize patterns of mostly race, but certainly also gendered inequalities in sort of land use in the Rochester area. So things like land dispossession from Native peoples in the region, racial covenants in houses, right? Houses that had a deed that said basically only white people can live here. Where were those? How do those correlate with redline maps from redlining in the 30s, 40s, and 50s? Environmental hazards. How do those maps map onto lands in Rochester that are contaminated versus safe? There's other themes to our, evictions. I mean, so the point is, how do we think about these different forms of, how do we visualize these different forms of dispossession and inequality that are rooted in histories of race, class, gender, et cetera? That's a project that's going to be done with a wide range of faculty, and that's going to take a lot of student involvement in gathering the data, literally getting the deeds, gathering the primary materials, and also in visualizing how these maps should look, like really what the research should be, and then also inputting it and building the platform. So it's going to be a multi-year project. It's something that will emerge through different kinds of courses, but that's the kind of thing, like I don't have a lab the way a biologist might have a lab to put you in, but we have a lot of questions that either you can figure out, you can have your own question and we can support you in doing research to answer that, or there are increasingly opportunities for you to connect the questions that we're asking and be part of these collective projects.
Thanks, Kristen. Impressive that you can predict my questions, but we'll move on. Let me see. So beyond research opportunities and all these experiences post-grad, what would you say are programs both through SBAI and FDI have that make them stand out compared to other institutions, like across universities?
Yeah, so what we have that other, like why someone might want to come to U of R in particular. So Jane, maybe I'll answer this in part in relation to FDI, and then I can, since I've been talking too much, I can turn the floor for you to say a little bit if you want for SBI. But one thing I'll say is that I think we really like these programs. So lots of these programs in other institutions are not actually don't have institutes anchored to them. They might be a minor here and there. They might be sort of what we would call a cluster, but they're sort of under supported. And I think our institutes, these anchors, are getting increasing support from our institution and increasing what's the word, sort of permanence, like really being active and strong. FDI has a new director coming next year. Jeffrey McCune is his name. He, has, I don't want to speak for his vision, but, things are going to build and grow. I think the same with SBAI. We have like really exciting faculty who are involved. We have a bunch of, I was going to say younger, but that's the less relevant thing, but people who've come in the last 5 years, faculty in departments across the institution who are like really doing exciting research and teaching really creative classes. And so the momentum is building. I mean, COVID sort of halted all of our momentum and like sent us all home for a while, but that's all of that is resurging. So I think that's really, really good. I mean, we're in a period where across the nation, I'm seeing programs get cut, programs such as ours lose funding, or even the programs themselves be cut. And that's not happening here at all. Like we really do have robust support. And so I think that's really exciting. The other relatively unique thing I would say about FDI at least is, although it's not fully unique, but there's a living, we mentioned the Douglas Leadership House, which is a living house that is also worth, if you're interested, looking into. And it's a residential house where the students do their own programming, et cetera, much of which has a social justice slant to it. They don't have formal connections to FDI or SBI, but a lot of our students who live there are either our majors or are interested in our classes. So it's a place I think that, and again, you can speak more to the student perspective, but where I think a real sense of community and home for students is formed that then supplements our classes and probably supplements the student experience. I mean, I know when I have a class that has a handful of students who live in DLH in it, it's like, it can often shift the dynamic of the class because they're like really committed. They're super smart. They're super engaged. They know how to speak across difference, and they can really like animate the classroom in really productive ways. And so I do think that similarly, the Burgett Center programs that connect with us in OMSA, like there's a lot of support on the student side that I think we are increasingly trying to connect with our academic programs to really, I think, to connect the extracurricular stuff that students do with the stuff we're doing in our classrooms. Jane, am I forgetting pieces of I didn't mean to be too FDI heavy there.
Oh, I think that was all accurate about what is special about us. And it is true that compared to many other, specifically for gender, sexuality, and women's studies, compared to a lot of other programs that we interact with through this sort of like international organization of these sorts of programs, when we talk about the extensiveness of our faculty networks and the types of courses, new courses that are coming up, and the number of courses that we're allowed to offer because of funding, is typically much higher than other institutions with these sorts of programs. And people I'll ask like, well, how'd you get that? So it's a good spot to be in terms of variety within these fields. And also, I think Rochester is a unique place specifically for activism and sort of understanding or seeing a sort of larger community that has historically been very involved in these sorts of social movements, like, Gay Liberation Front, empty closet history, the LGBTQ activism history in Rochester is great. The race revolts in 60s here, just like, and then throughout, just there's a lot going on. We have a lot of people, just the citizens in Rochester always volunteering and doing stuff and so involved in any variety of organizations. And there's so much art and music that goes on usually. You can't see the music in the ways that we used to be able to, but that is all connected to, and students who participate in these programs and participate in those worlds as well. So that is another less academic, but also important to, I think, an undergrad perspective.
Yeah, that's really, really, I'm glad you said all that, Jane. I think that's really, really true. And you reminded me, I think that's one of the key things that like I love. Again, I was a transplant to Rochester. Like, you know, I came here, it's now my 9th year here, but what I love about the city, which I think is part of what relates to the research that I do too, is that like it is a city where so much has happened and is happening. And it's at a scale that's approachable, right? Like the thing that can be hard is our campus can feel separated from the city because it's a lovely, lovely campus that basically is surrounded by a river. But like once you cross the river and like once you like walk down the block, right, the city is right there, and things are accessible because the city is not so enormously huge that you just get lost in it. But you really can do things. If there's a person you want to meet or get involved with for a research project, like we can usually get you to that person. We can, if there's an archive you want to get into, we can get you in that archive. Like we actually had a project through SBI that got halted somewhat because of COVID, where the Rochester Museum and Science Center is doing an exhibit that's launching very soon that's spotlighting Rochester area women. This is because of the centennial of women's suffrage. The city is doing all kinds of things. And SBAI has partnered with them. We had students work as interns on that project to literally help develop this museum exhibit. And we were on the cusp actually of having our students go do the oral histories of the women still alive to include in the museum exhibit. That got paused with COVID. And then we're actually going to start it up again in the spring semester, we hope, so that it will, after the exhibit's open, so that it will become part of the exhibit's archive and part of the traveling exhibit. But these are the kinds of connections that like just would be harder to foster if you were in an enormous city where just like everything is more complicated. So we have a tremendous amount of like stuff here, but we also have the capacity to access it because of the comparative level of scale, which I think is really, from a faculty perspective, it's like super exciting because of the kinds of things we can do with our students. And I think that from the student perspective, it's also pretty great.
I would say so, based on my time as an undergraduate student studying gender, sexuality, and women's studies. Something else that I noticed, I actually was working on a project for the Susan B. Anthony Center, which is separate from the Institute. And I was looking at the different types of centers that would be similar to the Susan B. Anthony Center and the Susan B. Anthony Institute. And I can say that Rochester is one of the places that places intersectional feminism at the forefront of our education with regards to gender studies. And I think that that's incredibly important because within identity, like it's not just one piece of your identity that's interacting with the outside world. It's all of your pieces of identity and their intersections. But I also, since you reminded me earlier, Kristen, of the sources of funding that we do have for research, I also want to put a plug in for Humanities Research and Innovation Grant that Admissions gives out to students. So if you're interested in gaining research funding for the humanities specifically, you can be considered for this grant to use towards any sort of research related expenses. Also, I recognize that we're coming close to 4 p.m., the end of the event. I know a couple of folks joined us late, so if you have any questions, please do type them into the Q&A box and we'll do our best to answer them. But Jane, you look like you had something to say? Okay.
I was just remembering one of the questions that was submitted earlier, which was how do we tackle sensitive issues around race and other sorts of like touchy topics, and what are everyday conversations like around these and how often do they take place? And in terms of our own programs, all of the time. I think that's primarily the central focus, at least in GSW, and every AAS space and event I've been in, it's central. And people are there to learn always. I think. It's approached from a very open mindset, solution-based. How many voices can we get in here? That kind of approach is typically how they're handled. If that sounds right, Kristen, you're the one who's more like in the larger group discussions as a staff person in an office. I'd say it's pretty central.
Yeah, I would say it's absolutely central. And I would say I think students come to our classes in part because they want to continue, either they want to start having these conversations and gain the tools to do so. And we offer classes that are like designed explicitly that way. Like, I mean, that's what sort of the 100 level or 101 classes do, is they help you get a vocabulary for thinking these things through if you want to sort of have a critical beginning. And then upper level classes, you dig in more. And I think, you know, it launches from the professor's syllabus, like those are the texts you begin with, but I know that faculty then, you know, adapt their syllabi as needed, et cetera. But so I think having these conversations around a text, whether that text is a film or that text is a passage of a book or that text is a legal case, lets the conversation be grounding. The issues can be worked out without it spiraling sort of totally out of control. Or just becoming so abstract as to not be meaningful. I mean, and I guess I'll just add another thing. I think it also, it is productive in relation to who we have in the room. So this, I know I keep talking about this one class I'm teaching, but it's probably because I taught it earlier today, so it's in my mind. This class called The Cultural Politics of Prison Towns. And like that class, part of why it's so fun for me to teach and also super challenging to teach, and by fun, I mean like I'm learning from it as much as I hope my students are, is that class is a class where, again, we're trying to understand sort of the lived effects of incarceration in our region. And we have students in that class who are from towns that have prisons, students in that class who have loved ones who are correctional officers, and students in that class who have family members who are incarcerated or who grew up in the areas of the country that are hyper-policed along lines of race and gender in particular, right? So you have students coming at this, at the core question of the class from really different perspectives. And yet, that is, to me, what makes the discussion, and therefore we have to talk about race, gender, sexuality, state power, violence, et cetera, right? It's like you have to talk about like all the good stuff, which is the bad stuff, you know? And yet like it works in part because you can't create a straw man argument when you have the people in the room who are from that perspective, right? It means that people are really engaging carefully and thoughtfully about it. Occasionally things go awry, like people say something and then we have to like backpedal and address it and like try to fix it, because I can't say that there's never uncomfortable moments or complexity, but I think we all remain committed to having these conversations in educational spaces.
Definitely. We are getting very close to the end, so I want to thank our panelists for taking the time out of their days to be here with us today and educate us more on the Frederick Douglass Institute and the Susan B. Anthony Institute and all the wonderful work that goes on in both places. I have to say that this is probably my favorite topic to talk about, as probably my best decision at Rochester was choosing to major in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. It completely evolved my worldview to think more critically about things involving identity and how reality is not something that we necessarily have to accept, so to speak. We need to think about it more critically and engage with it more, question everything, really. But anyway, thank you all for joining us today, and thanks to those of you who choose to watch us later. If you do have any questions, I did put my email address in the chat. So if you're looking to connect with either Kristen or Jane or Ghislaine, we are happy, well, I'm happy to be the one to bridge that gap and answer any questions that you have involving admissions and the humanities.
And I'll just chime in. I just wanted to double add that, again, Jeffrey McCune will be the new director for FDI next year. And he's like really exciting and engaging. And I don't have at my fingertips the press release about him coming to U of R, but if you want to learn about him, you can look him up, or maybe we can put a trace of his, to introduce him through, because he'll be the one leading FDI forward after next year. And he'll be teaching classes and bring a new excitement and energy there too. So
I just dropped a link to that News Center Rochester link for him in the chat.
Thank you.
Want it? Copy it. Yeah, he seems great. Job Talk was so fun.
And he in fact does both like, sorry, I'm pointing to my two hats. He does both race and gender and sexuality. Like he sits at the intersection of all of these things actually. So yeah, exactly. He also wears the multiple hats. So.
And we're all really excited to have him come and join our community. But for those of you who might not be able to spell my name, you can easily find my email address on the admissions website. We do have a staff page in which all of our faces, names, and email addresses are present. So you can easily find us there in case you're unable to access the chat. But thanks again to our wonderful panelists, and stay safe, everyone.